Just can't get enough. Just can't get enough. Just can't get enough.
Can't get enough of you.
Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. Jet Set Radio is easily one of my favorite games from back on the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast had a ton of arcade-style games, or even outright ports, and Jet Set Radio fits right at home on the console. Jet Set Radio differentiates itself from the rest, still featuring score-focused arcadey gameplay but also adding story elements in, and although it's not like the story was amazing or anything, it still punched up the appeal of the game, making for a fuller experience. Even today, it's still a very fun playthrough and, in my opinion, is basically required reading for Dreamcast enjoyers. The real magic of Jet Set Radio comes from the combination of its arcade gameplay with the undeniably iconic visuals that are signature to the franchise, as well as the funky, fresh beats surrounding your graffiti sessions. The game still looks gorgeous with its cel-shaded, brightly colored characters and environments. Everything related to the visuals for the franchise are just flawless. Hot elements, menus, and even promotional assets are brilliant works of design and perfectly establish the energy of Jet Set. The art direction just oozes late 90s, early 2000s cool, and I love it. If you've ever wondered what I look to when it comes to visuals for my channel, I can't pretend I've ever come up with anything close, but Jet Set Radio Future specifically is a massive influence. Now the music. Dude, the music. The original score for the franchise is mostly handled by the world's biggest Family Guy fan, Hideki Naganuma, and this man elevates everything present in the series and ties all of its elements together perfectly. Jet Set Radio is a perfect platform for Naganuma's distinct compositions. Naganuma's taste and willingness to get weird with his music informs so much of the franchise's vibe that Jet Set Radio simply would not be Jet Set Radio without him. His tracks cover a range of genres but manage to combine together with solid coherence, having his signature present across the soundtrack and furthering the connection between him and the series. Honestly, the tracks he's made for Jet Set Radio as well as other projects like Sonic Rush are worth listening to on their own. Seriously, he is beyond talented. Jet Set Radio released in 2000 on the Dreamcast and shortly after got a sequel, Jet Set Radio Future, in 2002 on the original Xbox. Jet Set Radio Future looked at improving the gameplay of the franchise, moving away from the arcade style by getting rid of time limits in favor of more traditional, objective-focused gameplay, which also helped to focus the narrative, fleshing out exploration with an open-world approach and expanding on movement by adding input requirements for tricking, a boost mechanic, and more. Jet Set Radio Future brought the franchise to the next gen with all these changes, and fans were very happy with the new and improved direction for the series. For me personally, the only issue I have with Future is the changes to the color palette. I understand the decision was probably made to make a clear distinction between the world of Radio and Future because they're supposed to be two different realities, but the art direction of the first game just popped so much more to me. Regardless, Future really is the evolution of Radio in nearly every single way, and a killer sequel, full of all the Jet Set Radio charm, and of course it brings even more great tracks along with it. Jet Set Radio will always be very special to me. It doesn't have the deepest games by any means, but they are the ultimate vibe games. The franchise is the epitome of cool, with its style being undeniable, interesting world building, anti-authority and militarization themes, and cartoonish elements that just reinforce the series' need to always champion that era's definition of cool, like how everybody is always dancing if they're not skating, or the soundtrack being presented in-game through a pirate radio station the GGs are tapped into. Unfortunately, Future didn't sell very well even though it got good reviews, due to being an Xbox exclusive. Of course, the Xbox has never been popular in Japan, and that is where Jet Set was the most popular, so that was it for the series. Like a lot of Dreamcast-era icons, the IP was left dormant. Both games were relegated to cult classic status, with the fanbase left hanging, hoping Sega would give Beat and the GGs another chance. Now I know there was only one thing going through your mind while we were looking at all that footage of Jet Set Radio. And that one thing was
Holland.
Team Reptile, Holland-based indie developer, has always taken clear inspiration from Jet Set's aesthetic. My first experience with them was Lethal League Blaze, which you should definitely check out if you haven't. It's a sick fighter. And the Jet Set Radio effect is clear visually. There's even a character in the game, Jet, who's an unsubtle reference to the series, and on top of that, they got the man himself, Hideki Naganuma, to compose a track for the game. So back when the studio announced they were working on a spiritual successor to Jet Set Radio, Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, it was incredible news to fans. Sega clearly wasn't interested at that point, and if anybody was capable of taking on the project, the team had already demonstrated that they were the perfect fit. Bomb Rush Cyberfunk wears its influence on its sleeve, so I think it's fair to take a good look at it and see if it manages to surpass and evolve from that influence. With that said, let's get into Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. Visually, Bomb Rush Cyberfunk is stunning. The game features cel-shaded visuals, interesting and bright colors, stellar animation that flows together flawlessly, brilliant uniform art assets, and a nice variety of locations to display those great elements. Basically, it's exactly how you'd want a new Jet Set Radio game to look, and it seems like that is what the team was going for here. The spirit is captured very well. I'm glad the inspiration for the color palette seems to more come from Jet Set Radio rather than Future, as the bright colors used suit the tone of the game perfectly and add a level of charm to just exploring and taking in the environments. The colors might be closer to Jet Set Radio, but Bomb Rush Cyberfunk takes the cyber part of the name seriously, with the menus, HUD, and even in-game ads and signs nailing that Y2K futurism aesthetic that's heavily utilized by Jet Set Radio Future. The aesthetic feels very natural to Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. They work it in to really complement the world they've built for the game. Really, the art direction for the game is perfect. It all comes together to form a cohesive and in-your-face look. It feels like a combination of the stylings from Jet Set Radio and Jet Set Radio Future, taking the best parts of each to refine and ending up with a great marriage between the two. The character designs for the game are also solid, having that signature low poly count and each having their own fashion sense that fits under the game's umbrella. For the most part, you're free to switch around who you play as, and I did often because I wanted to see these cool designs in action, and there are a ton of unlockable characters and costumes to experiment with. Obviously, we can't talk about the visuals here without mentioning the graffiti, which is a standout for the game. Team Reptile worked with artists as well as the community to cultivate a sick collection of street art for the game. The artists they collaborated with really understood the assignment. All of the pieces felt at home in the world of Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, and I found myself actually learning a few specific inputs to be able to display my favorites where I wanted instead of just throwing whatever up. With the visuals in the game as a whole, the flavor really is here. Even at a glance you can tell. Maintaining a very stylized foundation makes the game look timeless. It'll look just as great years later as it did on release. Ripping through beautiful environments, looking cool as hell, and painting killer artwork was a must for a spiritual successor to Jet Set Radio, and Team Reptile evidently put so much care into making sure everything was just right. Both Jet Set Radio and Jet Set Radio Future didn't have very deep or complex stories, and I'd say the same goes for Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, but in a weird way. In short, you're Red, a cyberhead who had a normal head before his was forcibly removed from his body. After this incident, you're in a new gang, and your gang's goal, along with every other gang in New Amsterdam, is to become all city. Basically, be so cool and better than all the other gangs at street art that your gang is the undisputed GOAT of New Amsterdam, similar to the turf war story Jet Set Radio Future had. So, you and your gang set out to do this, taking on other gangs and fighting off the very militarized police while trying to solve the mystery of who Red exactly was before his head went missing. The story has similar themes to Jet Set Radio being anti-authority and anti-militarization, but also with Red being a cyberhead is able to play around a bit with the self and personal identity. Now, yeah, that sounds deep, but the game never presses too hard into exploring those themes. Looking at it as a whole, the plot is still point A to point B. Don't get me wrong, with Bomb Rush Cyberfunk I wasn't looking for an in-depth story or anything. I don't think this style of game would be very suited to a complicated or sprawling story with dynamic, challenging themes. But I was left feeling there was a much better approach possible. To be honest, I wish the story with Red had even less focus so that we could get to know the other characters in the game a bit better. There isn't any effort towards fleshing out the members of your gang or any relationship dynamics present there, or hell, even exploring any of the other characters really. Bomb Rush Cyberfunk is full of cool character designs, and I wish they took the time to imprint a bit more personality onto them instead of trying to get a bit philosophical while keeping everything at the surface level. Like, instead of the whole mystery of who is Red, I'd much rather Red was just Red, and the gang wants to go all city, and we get to see them hang out and interact with the other gangs on a more personal level. There was an opportunity to create interesting character dynamics due to the fact that gangs exist in the game in the first place, but it's never capitalized on. What gangs are cool with each other? What ones are not? How did certain gangs come together? They all look so interesting and I want to know more, but it's pushed aside in favor of the Red stuff, which feels like a bad trade. In a way, I'm glad the themes were underdeveloped because I think going deeper wouldn't have worked at all tonally, but at the same time, it just comes off as confused with its choice to have these themes in the game in the first place. All the themes in the game aren't balanced very well, so by the end, everything wraps up with the depth of a Saturday morning cartoon you happen to catch a random episode of, versus the finale of a show you've been watching where you understand all the characters, and them accomplishing their goal has weight behind it thanks to that understanding. The reality is, this story only exists to push the gang into different locations and situations, leading to graffiti action and boss battles, so why wasn't that purpose utilized more effectively? It's hard to ignore how strange the direction they went with is, but at the end of the day, it's relatively inoffensive. With this story, I had little to no expectations at all in the first place. The narrative is fine, and that's fine. It succeeds in moving the game forward, even though it is unnecessarily bloated. In brief, the story is alright. It's a bit weird, but it doesn't really matter that much.
You can shut up now.
Without a doubt, when setting out to make a spiritual successor to Jet Set Radio, the music should have been top priority to get right, and I'm happy to say that was the case with Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. The soundtrack for Bomb Rush Cyberfunk is a melting pot of talent, perfectly selected to elevate the game's energy and accompany the gameplay beautifully. In contrast to Jet Set Radio, which featured some rock songs, there's a noticeable shift towards electronic-centric tracks, which I think suit the game really well, considering how entrenched everything is in the cyber part of Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. We have house, rap, hyperpop adjacent tracks, funk, EDM, and more. Everything fits into the game really well, and the amount of music they included from different artists while maintaining a consistent tone is genuinely really impressive. Of course, they got the king Hideki Naganuma to return with 3 tracks made just for the game, but he's certainly not the only standout on this soundtrack. It's full of great musicians. Team Reptile even went the extra mile by having the artists individually upload their tracks to streaming so they get more support instead of if it was released as an album by the studio. On top of that, they also made sure the entire soundtrack is also Content ID claim-free, which is massive for anybody looking to make a video like this or stream the game. I was constantly impressed by the soundtrack. I made collecting music in the game a priority and came away with a couple new artists to keep my eye on. Basically, if you like Jet Set Radio music, you'll like the Bomb Rush Cyberfunk soundtrack. The two share a strongly similar overall energy despite including different genres. Team Reptile really made sure the music was dialed in. I'm positive anyone that plays this game will add at least a few songs off the soundtrack to their own rotation. The gameplay in Bomb Rush Cyberfunk follows a linear repeating structure. You get into an area, paint it to get the attention of that area's gang, then there's a boss battle, usually with the police, then a timed graffiti score battle with the rival gang to win the area, then a red dream sequence that's geared towards platforming, rinse and repeat. I think the pattern works well for the game. For the most part, none of the pieces overstay their welcome, so the variations in gameplay manage to keep things interesting throughout. My favorite parts are hands down the initial area exploration and score battles. They feel like the primary intention of the developers, so they're the most fleshed out and fun sections of the game. Ripping around a brand new spot and painting it while finding collectibles hidden throughout and listening to the new music the area provides is what Bomb Rush Cyberfunk is all about. Movement in the game takes after Jet Set Radio Future pretty heavily. Looking at the two systems side by side, there's no doubt it was the main inspiration for Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. There's some modifications to it here and there, but overall they feel similar, which isn't a bad thing. Bomb Rush Cyberfunk feels great to just skate around it. There's the boost mechanic, vertical grinding, and inputted tricking mechanics from Jet Set Radio Future, but the tweaks Bomb Rush Cyberfunk makes to tricking is where the magic is. In Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, you're able to keep a combo going as long as you're not just regularly skating or boosting when you're moving around. So, with the new slide move you can do in between grinding or throwing up pieces, you're able to rack up huge scores while playing. There's a timer on the slide, so you need to be consciously aware of where you're going and what you're going to do next. When you're just about to drop a combo and you hit a perfect super trick or barely make a boost jump onto a rail to keep your combo going, it makes getting a really big score satisfying, even though most of the time it doesn't matter. Speaking of grinding, they've also added in inputs you can do around corners to give yourself a boost of speed and also rack up a multiplier on your score. This mechanic keeps you engaged while grinding and also encourages you to hit every corner possible to get that score up. There isn't necessarily a point in going for a huge score unless you're in a score battle, but the movement mechanics the game asks you to engage with to keep a combo up are Bomb Rush Cyberfunk at its peak gameplay feel. so I always felt encouraged to keep my numbers up just because it felt so damn good. Well, for the most part, movement in the game feels great. It's not perfect. There are a lot of inputs you'll be doing frequently, like boosting, painting, sliding, and grinding that will hard set or decelerate your character's speed and impact the flow you have going. I understand this was probably implemented to make racking up big combos a bit more accessible for more players, but I would have loved if Team Reptile put that challenge to the player instead of not giving them an option. If it was the player's choice to either lean more towards Twitch reaction-based gameplay, keeping their speed at the max, or consciously have to make inputs to maintain a pace that they can keep their combo going, I think that would have given the player more freedom to create their own unique gameplay experience, which is, in my opinion, preferable to having this constant stop and start going. The feeling that the game is limiting you is noticeable and can be frustrating at times, but as a whole, Bomb Rush Cyberfunk Completely Vanilla feels stellar, and I'm always impressed by games that make basic movement feel enjoyable. Painting in the game also feels great. Jet Set Radio had a spray can requirement to manage and timed inputs for tagging that included curved analog inputs, which could feel awkward at times. Jet Set Radio Future streamlined the graffiti system to an extreme, still requiring paint cans, but the only input required is pressing the trigger. Bomb Rush Cyberfunk does away with resource management, and tagging is done through a set amount of points, depending on the size of graffiti, that you can draw between in a line to throw up your desired piece, and it feels like the perfect balance of what Jet Set Radio and Future had going. Being able to memorize the inputs of your favorite piece or simply spam and see what pops up both feel equally good. It's not completely hands-off like Future, but also isn't as disruptive as Jet Set Radio. As soon as you get used to how tagging works, there's no hang-ups, failed tags, or empty paint cans to worry about. You can just experiment and have fun however you please. You'll obviously be doing it a lot during the game, and I never got tired of it. Even when I would revisit fully completed areas just to cruise around in, I found myself repainting just because I loved doing it. Then there's the combat in the game, which feels very awkward and stiff as a whole. Jet Set Radio Future didn't have good combat, and unfortunately neither does Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. The boss battles, which are basically the only situations where you're forced to participate in combat, are always just a little janky in their design, and with how floaty and stilted the combat is, I wish it wasn't in the game at all. In fairness, I'm not exactly sure how it could have been done much differently. The way it's implemented makes sense as a natural extension of the mechanics already present in the game. I just don't see why it was deemed necessary to include in the first place, other than the fact it was in Jet Set Radio Future. It felt weird in that game, and it's the same in this one. I'd rather have another area the size of the hideout over any combat mechanics being present. Again, there's not too many situations where you have to engage with the combat system in the first place, so it's not a huge deal, but the game is no doubt at its worst during these sections. Putting up tags in Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, of course, attracts the attention of the cops, just like in Jet Set Radio. In Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, you build heat over time while tagging, with each star threshold leading to a more and more over-the-top response from the police. In regular gameplay, this system is alright. The police take a minute to show up in new areas, and your star level seems to scale well after they do, until you reach whatever scripted segment that has you move on from the graffiti section of the gameplay loop. The heat system in Bomb Rush Cyberfunk begins to show its flaws upon revisiting any areas you've already completed the main objectives in. If you go back to any location to try to hit any graffiti spots or collectibles you missed, you'll find the heat system in Bomb Rush Cyberfunk has shifted to be far more aggressive. The meter builds much faster now, with every 1 or 2 tags getting you an additional star on your heat, so going for full completion of areas becomes a massive headache. You're constantly bombarded by police, along with their increasingly frustrating to deal with military weapons and gadgets. Low heat is fine, you can simply outrun the police chasing you and it's no big deal, but once they bust out the handcuff shooting machine, snipers, and helicopters, Bomb Rush Cyberfunk begins to turn into a chaotic mess. There's a difference in how you play the game when you're completing the main objective. You're most likely hitting whatever spots are visible to you while flying around through the area. But when you're trying to get the spots you missed, you're a lot more observant and thorough with your exploration, which does not complement being hounded by enemies in the slightest. But Ghoul, I hear you say, you can reset your heat meter by going into a bathroom and either changing or reselecting your outfit. This is true. You can do that. And then as soon as you go back to tagging, the meter kicks up again immediately. So either you can do your best to ignore the enemies, which don't pose much of a legitimate threat, they're really just annoying, or you can constantly go hit the bathroom as soon as Mr. Handcuff shows up, which is also very annoying. I'm fairly certain the reason meter builds so fast when you're revisiting areas is because sometimes you need enemies or obstacles to trick off of to be able to hit certain spots or collectibles. However, for the vast majority, you do not need them present, and in some cases, even when they appear to be required, you can just use your movement in creative ways to circumvent that entirely. It is baffling that some kind of jammer app you can use on your phone after completing the main objective for an area wasn't implemented. An option to toggle police on and off would completely skirt around this frankly impossible to miss issue while still leaving the mechanic accessible at will for collectibles and spots that you need it for. Considering how fast meter builds, it wouldn't lead to significant slowdown, and even if it did, I'd find that to be much better than all the music in the game being accompanied by as soon as I get a few tags up. Speaking of annoying, I just want to take a quick sec to say if you like the video and you want to see more from me, feel free to bomb that subscribe button. You know what I'm saying? This is self-promo and I'm really good at it. And back to the video. Lastly, we have the dream platforming sections, which I think are a nice addition. They break up regular gameplay and give the player a chance to engage with the movement mechanics of the game in a different way than they're used to. They also give Bomb Rush Cyberfunk an excuse to take its already stylized visuals and go crazy with them. There's not very many of these platforming segments in the game, plus they're always pretty short, and I think that's a good thing. By the time you're finished up with any given one, you're feeling refreshed and ready to jump back into some graffiti and exploration. I might not be a fan of the narrative elements attached to them, as this is where a lot of the who is red, oh my god I don't care stuff goes on, but isolated from that, they break up gameplay well and look good while doing it. Moving on to things Bomb Rush Cyberfunk has to offer aside from what's included out of the box, I have to shout out the insanely active and dedicated modding community. There is an ocean of mods for this game. Everything from new characters, music, stages, to gameplay adjustments, additions, and fixes are all here. I'm not even joking. Think of basically any character. They've probably been modded into Bomb Rush Cyberfunk with a commendable degree of polish. I waited until I was fully finished with my playthrough of Bomb Rush Cyberfunk to dive into mods so I could get the full intended experience from Team Reptile, but even though I had nothing left to do in the game, I still got hours more of fun from the modding scene. Not only was it sick to skate around New Amsterdam as Beat, or Peter Griffin Family Guy, but considering how many tweaks and changes are out there, I was able to tailor my experience to get exactly what I wanted from more Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. Possibly the coolest mod I've seen for Bomb Rush Cyberfunk is Yuri's Movement Plus, which overhauls the movement mechanics for the game. This mod is popular to the point that if you've seen a video of Bomb Rush Cyberfunk somewhere, they were most likely using this mod. Since the game isn't designed around the faster pace and tweaks present here, I wouldn't recommend using it until you're finished up completing what you want to do in Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. It's more just an experiment that gives you an opportunity to really go wild and have fun tricking and soaring through the game. Seriously, throwing on a playlist, installing Movement Plus, and any mod that disables the heat system is a great way to soak in some more Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. There's so much more offered through modding than is possible for me to cover in this video. I barely scratched the surface, but it would be criminal to talk about Bomb Rush Cyberfunk without mentioning it. Modding adds so much extra value to Bomb Rush Cyberfunk to the point that anybody who owns the game should do themselves a favor and try it out. After everything's said, looking back at the question I asked in the beginning of the video, do I think Bomb Rush Cyberfunk surpasses Jet Set Radio and its influence that the game so proudly wears on its sleeve? No, not really, but I don't believe that's necessarily a negative takeaway. Before you go get mad at me in the comments, I love Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. It's easily some of the most fun I've had with a game recently, and I did everything there was to do in it because I enjoyed it so much. Let me explain before you kill me. After thoroughly playing through the game from top to bottom, it's clear that the only thing stopping Bomb Rush Cyberfunk from being Jet Set Radio 3 was the fact that Team Reptile doesn't have any rights to the IP. For all intents and purposes, Bomb Rush Cyberfunk is Jet Set Radio 3 with a different name and characters. I seriously doubt I'm the only person who got the impression that Team Reptile didn't want Bomb Rush Cyberfunk to have a strong distinction from Jet Set Radio, or the game simply wouldn't be the way it is. There was absolutely room for Team Reptile to really push in different directions from Jet Set Radio, but there's a clear effort to not do that. This is evident from just how similar core elements in the game refuse to strongly differ from what would be expected in a new entry from the Jet Set Radio series, like the way movement feels, combat being included, pace of gameplay, soundtrack feel, and its visual style being near one-to-one. To its credit, Bomb Rush Cyberfunk feels more real about the b-boy culture than Jet Set Radio ever did. While Jet Set Radio's use of the culture was primarily pure aesthetics, Bomb Rush Cyberfunk is actually about it. The director of the game, Theon Coster, grew up breakdancing, being involved in those circles, and the authenticity of his history with the scene is tangible. I mean, come on, the top gang in Bomb Rush Cyberfunk is literally called the Old Heads. They knew what they were doing. There's also a selection of different dance styles that each gang favors, which were implemented via motion capture by dancers that specialize in the style, with Dion himself even doing the choreography for some of them. If you don't believe me, just take a look at his Twitter and you'll see most of his tweets are about the culture surrounding Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. He's still active in the scene. The reason I say Bomb Rush Cyberfunk remaining very in line with Jet Set Radio isn't necessarily a bad thing is because we have Jet Set Radio 3, and Bomb Rush Cyberfunk doesn't pretend like it wasn't trying to give us exactly that. Bomb Rush Cyberfunk feels like the exact game the team behind Future would have made if they had the chance. So yes, it is unoriginal and strongly derivative, but it delivered, being entirely a celebration and love letter to Jet Set Radio while showing a stronger understanding of the culture that inspired it. Sega certainly wasn't interested in doing another Jet Set Radio, although after seeing the success of Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, it seems like they now are. And even though there's only like maybe 5 seconds of footage, I really do not like what I'm seeing, so thank God Team Reptile did give us Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. While I'm not upset at all with the outcome of the game, I love Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. To me, it doesn't surpass Jet Set Radio because the game doesn't attempt to separate itself enough, and that's perfectly okay. Personally, I wouldn't have been mad if Team Reptile was a bit looser with their spiritual successor, pushing the speed, trimming the fat, and even creating a more unique stylistic identity for themselves, but I'm also not mad that they didn't do that. However, since they didn't do that, it wouldn't feel fair to say that it outclasses the Jet Set Radio series. It's far too similar in every possible way to the point that it literally could not exist without it. Regardless, Bomb Rush Cyberfunk is a fantastic game that, while I had minor issues with, I loved the whole way through. I absolutely ate up the addictive gameplay and Y2K energy the game is bursting with. Team Reptile gifted us with another vibe game, of which the industry desperately needs more of, that takes pride in being a fun visual spectacle over everything else. I really can't recommend it enough if you're a fan of Jet Set Radio, the Dreamcast era, games drenched in style, or action platformers. It's an incredibly solid indie title from a studio that only seems to get better and better with every project they take on, and Bomb Rush Cyberfunk deserves to be played by as many people as possible.
The game is fun. The game is fun. It's fun, bother.
Hey, thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you watched my last one, you'll remember I promised to upload once every month, and so far we're on track. I'll keep doing my best to uphold that promise to y'all. Feel free to leave any topics you want me to cover in the comments. Ideas are always super appreciated, especially now that I'm committed to more frequent uploads. As always, you can find me as @GhoulFMV on Twitter and Blue Sky if you want updates. But yeah, I think that's all from me for this one. See you next month, and of course, love ya.